This opening panel will explore the joys and the complexities of couples who are traveling their donors' journeys together. So what do partners learn from each other? How do they take advantage of their distinctive assets that they bring to this journey? How do they make joint decisions? And most importantly, how do they deal with disagreements? But no Jerry Springer stuff today, okay? How do you craft and pursue a shared vision, which is very important as they continue this journey? So those are just some of the questions that they're going to deal with during the session. And we are in for a very, very dynamic and exciting conversation. So now let's begin with each of the couples introducing themselves by making comments. And I'm going to ask each couple one at a time to make those comments. And perhaps couples, you can think about how you each came to your giving, especially from your past. And this last question, if you're not first generation, you might want to mention that. What you're currently doing with your funding, and also what approach are you taking and what brought you to that approach? So, and anything else you want to add to your comments? I know you've had time to think about it. So,
you're going to start with you, Juan?
Let's start with you, Raj
Okay.
and Anna. Raj
Wonderful.
and Anna, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us here. It's inspiring to be in the company of all of you. And I thought we'd split our introduction between Raj and I would take you into our past, just so you get to know us a little bit. Raj came to the US from India 45 years ago this year. And he started as a dishwasher. And worked his way, went to night school, so chipped away at getting more and more qualified, had a very successful career, and he retired 10 years ago as the Chief Strategy Officer for Perot Systems, an IT company. I joined Raj about 36 years ago this year when we got married, and I came to the US. Stayed home, raised a family of 2 kids. We had extended family, we took care of them. And over the years, I started to work, so I retired in 2009 from a company called EDS, a small company some of you may have heard, and decided to do something totally different. Enough of corporate America, just wanted to do something more gratifying. So that's kind of, that's about the time both of us retired. And because you all know that he worked as a dishwasher, you know that this wasn't a generational inheritance kind of a situation. Then we both started to get engaged in philanthropy, and we decided it wasn't just our money that we wanted to give. We wanted to give our time, our other resources, the intangibles, the influence we had generated within the community. We wanted to bring all of that to bear. And so we became full-time volunteers.
Our children and grandchildren?
We've got 2 wonderful sons, 2 amazing daughters-in-law, and 3 grandkids who, when they come home, everything else shuts down. And that's about the only time things shut down. Because as husband and wife, when you're involved in a project, you never shut it off.
Don't mind me, I'll get up. I like to get up, stand up when I'm speaking. My name is Raj Asava, and the purpose of today's panel is to learn about how we as couple plan, how we as couple decide, how we as couple work together. But before we jump into that, it is important to set the context, is what exactly you as a couple do. So let me just share with you, as Anna mentioned about past and present, what is it that we are passionate about today? So Juan, I will still stay within our 5-minute slotted time. While the journey itself, if somebody is interested to learn more about it, we'll be happy to share in details after hours, not taking the conference time. But about 5 years ago, during our retirement, where we were enjoying travel, some philanthropy, and time with family, we came to know about the hunger issue. Hunger issue here in America, which shocked us. We always thought that hunger was a third world country issue. The whole world is beating its door down to come to America. This is the land of milk and honey and plenty. We didn't think hunger issue existed. We could not imagine, could not accept. But once it was validated, Anna and I decided, well, if this is an issue, we got to do something about it. So as she mentioned, clearly, easiest thing to do was to write a check, which we did. But then we said, it cannot be a one and done deal. It is a huge problem. When right where we lived in Plano, Texas, one of the most fastest growing region in the country, one of the most richest county in the country, when 800,000 people are hungry, one in 4 school-going children doesn't know where the next meal is coming from, one in 6 North Texans is hungry, we said, we really need to learn more about it and do something about it. And then when we looked beyond just North Texas, we were shocked to learn that 41 million people in America are food challenged. We said, food challenge, what the heck is that? I know hunger, but food challenge, that sounds like a consultative word. And somebody explained to me, think of food challenge from a child's point of view. When they leave school to go home on Friday, their next full meal is Monday. I mean, when we heard all these things, we said, while we do want to solve the world problem, but this is our country too. This country has given us a lot. I became from a dishwasher to a chief strategy officer because of this great country. So I owe it to do something about this country, to help this country. So Anna and I, besides writing a check, we came up with an idea. We said, communities, when they band together, when they believe in a cause together, they can truly transform things. This conference is about community. Last night we heard about community. So we said, how about if we take one community and we raise awareness within that community about the hunger issue, and then we team up and take on some ambitious goal to fight hunger. We come from the Indian background, so we reached out to the Indian community. We had a lot more connections and network over there. And we said, hey, this hunger issue is there, and it is real. And we said, how about we come together and join forces and make an impact? So we worked with the food banks, and we set a goal that the Indian community will provide 1 million meals. Now, imagine just 2 of us getting people riled up and set a goal, and we had no idea about how long it will take. So we never gave them a deadline to the food banks how long it will take. That's being the strategist that I am, right? Just give them a goal, but not the deadline, because we did not know. We did not know how long it will take for the community to actually step up. We were surprised. Within 6 months, we blew past the 1 million meals. The community was not aware of the hunger issue. The more we communicated, the more we raised the awareness, the more they stepped up, the more they embraced this issue, the more they wanted to get involved. And they came up with creative ways to get involved. So 6 months, we blew past the 1 million meals. 4 months after that, we blew past the second 1 million meal. And I'm glad to share with you that within 15 months, we have now crossed 4 million meals provided by the Indian American community. I just want to close by sharing with you, we are not a 501c3 organization. In fact, we hate titles and positions and things of that nature. So this is a 100% volunteer effort. All we are is trying to get the community riled up and connected to the right organization, which in this case is the food banks. The food banks love this model so much that now Houston Food Bank has adopted, we call this thing the Indian American Council, for the food banks. The North Texas has already made significant progress. Houston Food Bank has adopted it. Within the first hour of the launch in Houston, we raised 1 million meals. Because now the word is getting out. New York launch is scheduled for March 12th. California is looking to launch that. Get the Indian community all together and rallied around this hunger issue. We then eventually see that this model can be replicated to other communities, the Filipino communities, the Korean community, the Chinese community. Interestingly enough, the government is doing whatever it can do, but they cannot do everything. The society has to step up, the community has to step up, they have to embrace this issue, and they have to figure out how we can address it. So this is what we both are very passionate about it. We have our sets of arguments and debates and discussion, but we clearly know that we are all marching towards trying to end hunger as much as we can. So we look forward to sharing more details with you. Took a little bit more time, probably.
Thank you, Raj. The true meaning of philanthropy. So let me turn to Dawn and Chris now, if you would make your comments.
Sure. First of all, I would say thank you, Raj. That's very inspirational, and it's exciting to think about the possibility that you've had and will continue to have. And I'm going to take it in a different direction because we're definitely not at that stage of the journey yet. I guess we can chip off a question about coming from different backgrounds. I can sort of use that as a launch point. So I come from a family where there's been definitely multi-generational giving. I grew up with parents and grandparents who supported heavily the faith-based institutions they were part of, whether churches or synagogues, the educational institutions they went to, primarily colleges, but also some private high schools. And my parents enrolled me when I was in kindergarten in the local private school. It was just 2 blocks from the house. So I would be walking to school every day, and they from an early age instilled the notion that you should support these institutions that others have supported before. So that the school that I had was given, the school experience that I had came from people that had graduated from the school and chose to support it. So even when I was in 9th, 10th grade, they were encouraging me to give $25 or $50 a year to the annual fund, to do more than just give, but also to try to keep in touch with classmates and to try to be a multiplier. It's not enough to just take from the institution, it's also important to be giving back. And so I think that the earliest part of our journey was often the institutions that we were part of, the elementary school, high school, college. Those were probably some of the ways that I first got involved. And then the second part was service, which was we were working for a for-profit educational company at the time and wanted to get involved more, so we joined the board of a charter school that was just starting up in Los Angeles. And when I say we, I was on the board, but Dawn made it possible because we had a young daughter, and being on a board of a new school, it was all-consuming. It was not just doing the governance work, it was picking up the phones to recruit students. And so that partnership, I think, started at a really early age of making it happen with a division of labor. So let me pass it off now to Dawn, and I'll let you. Sure.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So we did come from very different backgrounds. Chris grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in Orange County, California. And my parents are the first generation to have college degrees in their families. And I went to wonderful California public schools, walked to school every day in the sunshine. And my growth and understanding of fundraising was walkathons and Girl Scout cookies and events of that nature, and that service really was the core to giving back. Taking that through college and then into my first big-time job up in San Francisco when we first met each other. I volunteered for Habitat for Humanity and decided that construction was my service. So that's my introduction to philanthropy, not even knowing it was philanthropy at the time. And I think that that's important because we bring a very different perspective. Mine is very much about engagement and doing physical work even. So to the point where I threw my back out on Valentine's Day because I had a boyfriend who didn't really care much about Valentine's Day, so I decided I was gonna hammer a bunch of stairs, maybe letting out some frustration. But then at the end of the day, he had to take care of me, and he learned that a nice box of chocolates goes a long way. So there's a little pain involved too. But service has been a big deal to us. And then if you fast forward, we've helped organize events for our kids' schools. Our kids have attended private and independent schools. So you get on those fundraising committees and head them and chair them. And now we both find ourselves with board positions, interestingly enough, in the arts. So our passion for collecting art has led us into positions, and I'm currently the chair of the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. So that's been an interesting journey on its own. So we find ourselves steeped into service in addition to having set up a donor advised fund in 2011 at the Pittsburgh Foundation. Do you want to take it from there?
Sure.
I have in my notes that you're going to take it from here.
I didn't know if you were telling, I didn't know if you were going to talk about the notebook.
It does take a team.
It does. And we tried preparing on the plane yesterday on the flight down just to be taking notes because there were some great questions that had been designed as we were putting together the panel. We definitely try to take a multi-generational perspective. You know, my parents first set up a fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation, I think it was in the mid-2000s, and then we moved to Pittsburgh in 2009 to be closer to them from Los Angeles. And it was wonderful. We could start the fund with just $10,000 and yet get access to an incredible wealth of resources. And we were on a panel where we had a chance to discuss sort of next generational donors. And yeah,
Okay, here,
sorry.
now I'll jump in.
There you go.
Where's Michael? I have a historical document here. Are you over there? Yes, we met Michael in 2013 when we were on a Next Gen panel when he was in Pittsburgh discussing intergenerational philanthropy, and I have my notebook and my notes right here. So I just want you to know that unfortunately the notebook started with a couple pages of notes and I just picked it back up, but it'll get full. So we've been discussing multi-generational giving for quite a while because Chris's parents are still actively involved, and so that also, in addition to the dynamic between us, the dynamic between us and his parents and now our children who are teenagers and becoming more aware of our activities is fruit for plentiful discussions. Okay, well, I'll wrap this up where we are now. I would like to say I love this idea of the donor journey. And where we are now, as the other day I said, I think that we're at the beginning of the middle of our journey. So joining the Donor Advised Fund and diving into some community giving circles and making sure that in Pittsburgh we really reached out to make a lot of new friends, bringing our perspective from living in California, taught us some things about social justice and equality issues in Pittsburgh that have really tapped into our hearts, and especially through the arts. So in 2017, we actually opened our own private family foundation. So we have multiple vehicles. We still are working with the Pittsburgh Foundation with the Donor Advised Fund, but we also opened up the Arts, Equity, and Education Fund in 2017, and it's an exciting enterprise that I'm mostly leading the charge with, but we definitely make decisions on grants together after I've done some work on it. So that's where we are now.
Great, thank you. And your teamwork shows.
Okay.
And now, Libby and Seth.
First of all, I just came from a conference in Detroit. It's the country's biggest conference on LGBTQ equality. I feel like you turned me up, and now I'm self-conscious. And we, in this conference, we have about 3,000 participants where we are trying to educate and help develop leadership among people who will advocate for LGBTQ equity and equality around the country. Very cold up there, and I actually really enjoyed all the ice on the river because I thought it was a spectacular nature example. So it's a really interesting thing to come from that to this room. And I think as I was sitting here earlier reflecting on how fortunate and privileged all of us are to be in this space filled with people whose purpose is largely guided by trying to improve the lives of others. And I just want to tell you I'm grateful to be in this room, and I just feel so blessed and privileged to be among people who care this much about trying to help humanity. So, we were asked where we started, and I will tell you, probably not unlike a lot of other people, giving or philanthropy, which is a big word for me, started with the collection plate, putting the dime in on Sunday morning in a collection plate. And somewhere along the way, trick-or-treating for UNICEF was part of that. So with regard to the collection plate, we went to church not so regularly when I was really young, but over time in the 70s, my parents became very involved in the church, as did I. And I don't know if you know, but in evangelical churches in the 70s, there was this big thing about giving, and you were supposed to give, or you were suggested to give, which felt like a mandate, but I was an impressionable teenager and I took it all in. You were supposed to give 10%. You were supposed to tithe to the church, and then above and beyond that, you were supposed to give, it was an offering, so that was sort of like missions work, something beyond the immediate work of the church. I really took that to heart and actually I think that informs all of our giving now. We no longer are affiliated with the church. Our giving doesn't actually go to the church anymore, but the concept sticks and it goes out to other things that we really care about. The other teaching in the church is that to him or her whom much is given, much is required. And I would say that is another standard that I tend to live by. Unfortunately, some internalized guilt complex or something reminds me of Schindler in the end of the movie where he says, I could have sold this watch, I could have done more. I by no means compare myself to Schindler, but I often feel like, people say, well, you did your best, and I'm like, oh no, I didn't do my best. I still have this watch, right? I still have so much privilege. I still just went on a trip to Antarctica, and the needs are yet so great. So I have completely diverged from my planned thoughts, but I will show you that the internal struggle is, and I would bet that it's true for everyone in this room, the internal struggle is how much do we give and devote our lives to giving, and how much do we, still enjoy our lives really fully. So that was only the first bit. UNICEF. In our school, they gave us each a little box, and you were supposed to build that box. I enjoyed the building part, and then take it out trick-or-treating with you. And so not only do you collect candy, but you say trick-or-treat for UNICEF, and hopefully they put money in your little box, and you take it back to school, and it gets distributed to some people in need. I collected 25 cents, 1 quarter, and I felt bad about that. Fast forward over 50 years later, and I do a fair amount of fundraising for LGBTQ causes. And I still I think there's probably a link there. I still think, oh, I should do better. I hope I can raise more money. So UNICEF and the collection plate. Also, my father, Seth and I did not grow up in families we're first generation giving, and I would say wealth is a relative term here. In both cases, we feel really fortunate that we grew up without money for the early years of our lives. I mean, just, we got by. We were fine, middle class. And then later in our lives, our parents were more successful in their businesses and were able to provide much better for the family, and we enjoyed some relative privilege at that point, college, grad school, and all that. So we feel blessed to have seen the full spectrum, and I think that helps us to be more understanding of people in all stages. From there, in terms of my philanthropy sort of evolution, I was really fortunate to be asked to be on an advisory panel for the GLBT Community Projects Fund at the Miami Foundation. And there I got to hear the stories of all these grantees or applicants, and got very involved in actually deciding who gets to have the grants. And then I joined the board of the Miami Foundation for 6 years. I was on the board, and for I think 4 of those years, 1 year I was a treasurer, for 4 of those years I was the head of the programs committee and the vice chair ultimately. Again, from that I learned giving strategies. While I was on that board, we were looking at how could we make a greater impact, how could we move the needle in specific areas, and tried to get out from under maybe having to serve some of the early, some people, I'm not saying this well, Rebecca, I'm sorry, but there were people who had maybe left something in their will a long time ago, and it amounted to maybe, a very small amount of money at this point, but we were still having to give according to what they had advised at that time. And as a foundation, we were trying to figure out how can we, do this more impactfully. And so tried to move towards giving fewer gifts at larger dollar amounts, to really move the needle. And I would say that that has very much impacted our personal giving. In terms of our giving, in our next question, we'll get to our LGBT civil rights stuff. But in terms of our giving practice as a couple, which is the perfect handoff to Seth, it's probably a little different from others. We frequently joke, Seth makes the money, I give it away. And honestly, it's really close to the truth. I'm fortunate that he pretty much trusts me on this because our core values are very much aligned, and that's reflected in our giving. And the other sort of joke around this, and maybe you all can relate, is I often say our 2 daughters are our biggest charities at the moment still. But as tuition payments are coming to an end, that's soon to really be, it'll change.
Okay. So the idea from the early part of my life, by the way, I found myself getting very emotional all of a sudden, so forgive me if I break down midway through my speech, but because the story is everybody's, so it is very inspiring and emotional. But the idea from my early part of my life that I would be on a panel at a family philanthropy conference was fairly far-fetched. You know, I grew up with a father who wouldn't give money and a mother who couldn't give money. And I, unlike my wife, was not imbued with this great sense of altruism and giving. So it just wasn't something that I thought much about. And, you know, my dad wouldn't give. He was not generous of spirit, and he actually said to his first meeting with his estate attorney, he said, and I quote, "Find a way for me to take it with me." And that's a true story. So for more on that, you can join me in my weekly therapy sessions down the hall. My mom couldn't give because they were divorced and she had no money. But luckily, this is the emotional part. My mom, with no college, formal college education, and like I said, working as a secretary, at the age of 42 with 3 kids, managed to run and win a seat in the state house, and I don't know what happened to me. But over 22 years serving, arguably became the most powerful woman in the history of the state of Florida from a political standpoint. And probably, considering what's happened in Florida, probably still would hold that title if you were giving such a thing today. And so even though she had no means, she had tremendous passion. And she wielded her power not like people wield their power in politics today, but she did it on behalf of those who had no voice. Women at the time, still somewhat today, but women, victims of rape, people with dependency issues, disabilities. I mean, you name it. I mean, she's, has a park, a street, a building, a state building named after her. I mean, she did amazing things. I was privileged enough to watch her debate on the floor of the House the Equal Rights Amendment, and actually got it passed for only time it got passed on the House floor, but about 10 minutes later they went down the hall and the Senate voted it down. But it was a pretty remarkable time. She was actually on the cover of the Los Angeles Times for that. And that was when I was younger. And I think, to me, what stuck with me, one of her most crowning achievements was she authored and got passed one of the nation's first hate crime laws in Florida. And she did that in conjunction with the Anti-Defamation League. So that kind of lied a little bit dormant until my formative years as a young adult. And then I went to hear one of the executive directors of the Anti-Defamation League speak, and then all that latent stuff that I grew up with came out, and decided it was time. And we didn't have any money, but we had this kind of, this latent passion, so got involved, and got involved in the Anti-Defamation League. You can tell there's a difference there. I wasn't giving on Sundays, maybe Saturdays, but not Sundays. But it was civil rights, nature, and we'll hear more about that's sort of what binds us. And so I got involved and stayed involved, and ultimately became the board chair for Florida for the Anti-Defamation League. And civil rights has just really become a passion. So that's really where our giving goes. And the interesting thing is, as you get involved, the more you get involved with your time, like your story, is you start to see the needs and the problems. And luckily for us, business got picked up, and then we were able to supplement the time with the money. It's a great combination. And then you get into the, then it just takes on a life of its own. Because I was talking to Anna earlier, you know when you give what it does to you personally, financially, you have less money. And but you can feel that. That you also can sometimes feel, and especially what you do, the effect it has on others. But the one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize until they get into it is what it does for you in your soul. And there's really no way to measure that. But I will say that for us, for sure, the more that we have given, the more has returned to us. And our life, our lives, our friendships is so rich from all of that. And I didn't see that coming, but that's an amazing byproduct of giving, which really, more than anything to me, spurs us on to try to do more because we've received so much from it. So that is my story.
Thank you.
Oh, look at that.
Thank you, Mike.
And you wondered why we picked you to come.
Well said.
As Michael said earlier this morning, every donor journey is different, and every donor journey is important. And so each one of you couples have a wonderful story, and that is why you're here. Well, I'm going to start with Libby and Seth. Let's continue with you. You okay, Seth? All right.
For now.
For now. So choosing to focus your giving on civil rights and LGBT issues, it's a significant strategic decision on your part. And so it clearly has shaped all of your journey thus far, a great part of your journey. How and why did you make that choice?
So you'll hear, it's interesting because in writing this, or pondering this, I realized how much the church has impacted my life. But for anyone who knows me well now, you'd be surprised because we aren't actually affiliated with any faith-based institutions at this point in our lives, but fully respect the impact it has and how much it informs our thinking. So I will tell you in this little journey that somehow in our church there was always this poster, like in the youth group, that said, "Bloom where you're planted." I had no idea what it meant. Years and years later, it's becoming clearer and clearer to me how much that has been relevant for me. Because basically opportunities have presented themselves right in front of me. And it's in taking those opportunities, delivering right where the need is that's presented in front of us that I think we have bloomed, where we're planted. So early in our marriage, we were trying to find a church because that was important to me, that would work for both of us. So for a Jewish guy, we have 2 kids. I'm from a Christian background. We need to find something that works for everybody. So we found this really progressive church, or so it thought it was progressive. And it was there that I met this guy, Terry, who became one of my very dearest friends. Terry's gay. And Terry said, and I was super involved in the church, volunteering on practically a full-time basis. And Terry said, let's make this a reconciling congregation. He explained it to me. For those who don't know, reconciling in the Methodist Church is basically putting out a welcome mat, going through a process that says we welcome gays and lesbians in this congregation. Sounds easy, we're a progressive church. Well, guess what? It took 3 years, it was super political, very painful, but we accomplished our mission. Shortly afterwards is when I actually left the church, but we, by the way, became the first Methodist church in the whole South to actually accomplish this. This was back in the mid-90s. It was there that I sort of got discovered. There were people there who said, look, can you help us work on this human rights ordinance for the county to try to add sexual orientation to the existing human rights ordinance? Remember, this is the 90s. Gender identity was largely unknown and not talked about yet. So I honestly didn't realize it was very obvious how discrimination was part of the social fabric, and clearly discrimination against gays and lesbians was prevalent in faith communities, but I didn't, totally ignorant, okay? I had no idea that it was legal to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. So I'm like, I don't know how I can help you, but I'm happy to try. You know, I have an MBA with a particular focus in finance and marketing, you know, whatever, we'll see what I can do. Immediately, it became clear that one of my better places to work would be as a campaign treasurer. So numbers are always my sort of default. As campaign treasurer, the needs were very obvious. We needed more money. Again, it's the 90s. A lot of people were not out. They were closeted because it wasn't safe to be out because you'd be fired from your job. So having people give is a little tricky because with a campaign, you have to report every gift by name and their profession, and it's not exactly safe to do that. So those people who were able to give and willing to give were not only generous but brave. And it became apparent that not only did they need gifts, but they needed our gifts. And in the 90s also, there weren't many straight allies and cisgender allies working on these issues. And so we just became more and more and more involved. Yes, I did some stuff in our children's school and later on was extremely involved in our children's school, but I felt like there were plenty of people willing to do those things and there were not many people like us who were able and willing to do the LGBTQ work. And honestly, as Seth said, this became our family, our social lives, our children's aunties and uncles, and actually legal guardians if anything happened to us. I mean, this really just became our entire community. Let me see what else. So we really focused our giving there. I started out in a local county-wide organization, and again, was sort of discovered, got really involved working on a gala for a national organization, have been doing that for probably 11 years or so, and was asked to join the board of the National LGBTQ Task Force. I generally don't jump in because I never think I have the talents for any of these things, and so it takes a lot of arm twisting for me to finally get over all my insecurities and say yes to something. So it took many years for me to actually join the board. I did. I'm on my second round as co-chair now, and my second round on the board, so I think I'm in year 9 at this point. With the beauty of the National LGBTQ Task Force is that it works at the intersections. It's not just we work to advance freedom, justice, and equality of LGBTQ people, but we recognize that reproductive justice, racial justice, economic justice, immigration rights, refugee rights are all LGBTQ issues, and all of these issues are our issues. So for me, I'm really fortunate to be able to have sort of one-stop shopping for marginalized communities, for people and causes that I really care about. So both in my civic engagement, I should say and in our giving, we can do this in like sort of one repository. No offense, we used to give to our children's schools, again, bloom where you're planted, and give a lot of time and money, and felt that similarly to you. But then as they graduated from those schools, I felt like, well, there are alumni and current parents who can take that on, and we're going to go back to really trying to allocate resources in an area that is still desperately underfunded. But while we were there, 2 things. One, I always spoke of LGBTQ issues, and 2, and it was often a very conservative audience, so it was interesting. And 2, all of our giving we designated at both the university and the high school level to scholarships to try to provide for those who wouldn't be able to go otherwise. But I think most of all, we really wanted to give in a place that we're passionate about and where we could have the greatest impact, and I think that's where we come to our civil rights work.
I'll add very little because you pretty much told my story, but...
Sorry.
No. So don't pause it. As you let everybody off the hook with that. We feel, we just came along at the civil rights, the big civil rights issue of our time, at a time when we were ready. We were ready to be involved, so we got swept up in it, and it's been wonderful. The thing I want to add is, one of the most empowering things I get to do every year, it's been now 3 years in a row, at the gala, they throw a big gala, it's like 800 people, black tie affair. It's a really, really, really wonderful event, and they asked me to do the ask, which is something I'd ever actually done before, and one thing I was when I was board chair of the ADL, I was really bad at was raising money, which is probably the #1 qualification, but I'm just bad at it. And it was also the most expensive 2 years of my life, because any of you know when you're asking people for money, they ask you for money. So I couldn't wait to get out of there because it was killing us. So altruism has its limits. But giving this ask every year, it's like I become like a different person for 5 minutes, and it's so meaningful, and it's actually been successful too. So they keep asking me back, but it is probably the single most empowering thing I get to do every year. So,
Again, it's the straight couple in the room, so it's hard to say no.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Don and Chris, on a different question, I'm turning to you, and I want you to go a little deeper in terms of how you deal with the differences that you each bring to the approach and the skills and the assets that you might be using. Again, the difference between those two and how you blend them together.
So we know we have them. That's the first start, is yes, we have very different backgrounds and perspective. I'm sort of, I'm relating a lot to your story about just understanding what it's like to not have a lot of wealth and privilege, but certainly be comfortable and to really strive and be motivated. So I sort of carry that with me all the time, and sometimes maybe I push too hard because my circumstances have changed. And Chris brings such grace and intellectual experience to our partnership that I think we're a good yin and yang balance. We're very, we come from very different points of view when we sit down and talk about the things that inspire us. But in fact, we're inspired by very much the same thing. So I mentioned art, and art is something that we have found as a couple, as a journey together, is our shared hobby. And we've learned a lot about visual arts and performing arts, specifically ballet, because we enjoy taking a little bit of vacation time and visiting a museum or a gallery. And when you put yourself out there in Pittsburgh, they figure it out. And if you write a small check to an annual fund, suddenly you're on the board. You show up at the ballet to a studio rehearsal, and suddenly you're on the board. So we sort of got pulled in without even really trying. And I think that is it's a really different perspective, because we're still forming where we want to stick our necks out for our passions. And we're sort of doing it in a really, almost in the opposite way. Is that here we are, people who have broad experiences throughout the world, but we're bringing some shared perspective of moving to Pittsburgh after living in California for a very long time, of the nature of diversity and inclusion in Pittsburgh is not where it should be. It's not where it should be in our entire country, but it's even less evolved in Pittsburgh. So there are some shared passions that we have found, that while we're working with these very historic white institutions of these grand art history, that we find that we're really pushing for change from within. And we bring some legitimacy because we write a sizable check, and so they listen to us, or he's the chair of the development committee, I'm the chair of the board, so they have to listen to us. And so at these junctures, we have decided together to stick our necks out there in a way that's beyond our own comfort level, but really pushing hard to bring racial diversity and equity and inclusion into the forefront, into the conversation, and to change things. It's clear that the foundations in our city are pivoting. They are pivoting towards smaller institutions, and they want change, and the large institutions have not changed enough. And so we are telling our donors and our big institutions, if you don't change, we are not going to have the funding anymore. We have a limited amount of funding in our city for major institutions, and these institutions will not last if they don't change. So we are grateful to have the opportunity to work with these institutions, but we feel a sense of desperation as well. We see the vaunted hallways of the Carnegie Museum of Art and the Natural History Museum. These places are incredible historically, but they really need to evolve and change. So through the arts, we have found a shared passion, and we inform each other and talk about the consequences of some of the positions we take and the discomfort that we experience because of the people that we work with are not accustomed to being pushed in that way. So division of labor, it's very simple. I am the operations person. I get things done. I'm very organized, and so I make sure that we do things on time, and Chris brings a really nice intellectual background and study and experience, and so I often go to him to make sure that this sounds right or looks right, and then we forge together. I don't say that we have very many disagreements, but we might take our time to make some decisions because we want to make sure we're both okay with them. So much.
I would just add to that in terms of building on what Don was saying about the intellectual curiosity, I sort of love the mechanics of development. Like I'm chairing the development committee of the Carnegie Museum of Art, and I have chaired our son's annual school, the annual fund at their school, and I'd love to get people involved. I mean, Dawn mentioned she likes engagement. We both feel that engagement's really important, and so when I'm meeting somebody, I want to find out what causes do they care about so that I can encourage them to be doing more of that. So oftentimes, a lot of the techniques, I want to hear what the ask is like. I want to understand, yeah, Seth, when you're saying, it's hard to get up there and do that, I'm always being asked to do that too, and I agree it's hard, but it's neat to understand how do I push myself through that, or how do I encourage others to do more of that. And I feel like we're sharing, we're brainstorming those kinds of ideas. We have what we call a shared brain, because I feel like
Marriage.
Well, it's a marriage, but it's also, in some ways, like philanthropy is incredibly rewarding, enriching, inspiring, but it's lonely, or at least it has been for us, because I think people sometimes assume things about us because they see us in a role that we're advocating change or making a donation, and whether their assumptions are accurate or not, they don't often talk to us to get to know us, and so we're trying to encourage, we're often our closest own supporters because we kind of know what we've done together. And
well, we're often the youngest in the room.
That too.
And we have been for a while, and we still are. So it's challenging. Yeah, you're right. It is. Yeah.
Right.
A quick story. This one time, I took a phone call from a board member at our kids' school. This was a really nice, high-end school in Los Angeles when we still lived there, and she was in kindergarten. It was our first year. We knew the call was coming, and it was an ask for a certain level for the annual fund. It was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was taking care of the 2 little ones, and he's not home yet. I don't know when he's coming home, and I just answered the phone. And, oh, yeah, sure, we were expecting the call. You got us, no problem. Yes, that's the amount. Okay, happy, thanks, bye. And I'm all proud of myself that I said yes, and because I wasn't accustomed to doing that as much. And then he comes home, and he's so disappointed in me when I tell him what I did. And he says, well, why didn't you listen to her full pitch? Why didn't you don't even know how she was going to ask you. It completely threw me. So he really does enjoy the mechanics, and I've learned that I have to try to adapt his mindset sometimes, but it's in service to our own abilities and the education along the way. So
That's great. Well, you're proving it takes a team. Thank you.
yeah.
And now I'm going to turn to Raj and Anna again. And Raj, in your comments, I couldn't help but notice that you did reference the fact that there are disagreements. Can you tell
I didn't
us?
recommend. I said it happens.
Would you tell us how you create safe space? Perhaps maybe what disagreements might come about and why, but also what you do to create safe space
Sure.
to be able to keep working together.
Sure. Let me start first, and then I will hand it off to my lovely wife. I think before we jump into agreements or disagreement, whenever there is more than one entity involved in any initiative, there are some core principles and values that have to be established up front. Some of that is first of all, mutual respect. If you don't have mutual respect for each other, then why are you even together, right? Especially why are you dragging one into something else that they may not have their heart or soul into? So fortunately for Anna and I, we come from similar background. Our families have the same value system. So that really grounded us very well from get-go as individuals, as couples, as parents. So those values were very, very important. Secondly, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you hear that as cliche, have fun, but sincerely have fun. Sincerely believe in that, right? So all the conflicts that will happen, which are natural, right? When two things come together, there will be some friction, but you are up towards a common cause. So we, in our case, had the value systems in place. We both knew that we are pulling towards a certain common goal and common cause. So with that understanding, every debate, every point, both of us are good communicators, and both of us love expressing our viewpoints. So a strength of a couple is that we become a sounding board to each other. Now, part of sounding board is not simply absorption, is to actually provide feedback. Now, a strength in a couple, which also could be disaster, is that we can give candid feedback. Oh, that sucks, right? That's something you cannot do at workplace, right? You have to really get around to a few meetings before you let them know that that idea will not work. Here, we can just, give that instant feedback. So we don't take it personally, right? We keep throwing ideas at each other. We know it's a safe environment. Then one that sticks, then we both believe in it, right? Then we start pursuing it further. So this has worked very well. But the key thing again, we both have to sign up to a common cause. We are not questioning the cause. Because if the moment you start questioning, why are we even doing this? Why did you even start it, right? So those are some of the principles and the way we have been able to tackle not just the philanthropy side, everything that got thrown in the life journey, if I were to say.
No, it's all of that. And also, along with mutual respect, there are definitely arguments in approach that we take. He likes to fly at 60,000 miles, and I'm more the operations kind of, I need to bring some realism into this. He's like, there's 40 million people hungry. We can't be slow about this. And I'm like, yes, granted. However, you cannot spring up Indian American councils all over the country, because each of these, if you think in terms of a franchise model, each of those will take some care and feed and our time. We've only got 24 hours times 2, but only 24 hours. So I'm like, let's be a little deliberate about it. So, he'll say, oh, you're slowing me down. And I'm like, no, we need to do this right. So, there's those kinds of conversations, but, nothing ever gets taken personally. We'll suddenly say, okay, let's have a brainstorming. And everything that we have learned in corporate America comes to bear. So there are times when neither of us are very religious, but there is a spiritual aspect. And we think everything we have been taught so far was to prepare us for this, right? So everything we've learned in corporate America, we will say, okay, let's put together some guiding principles for this next hour. Let's not walk away. No idea is a bad idea. So, we bring all of those things in, and we remind each other, okay, it's not personal. We are two different people. We will have two different perspectives at times. Let's talk it over.
We'll still walk away, arguing, debating, upset. Why she did not like my idea, right? That's just human nature. But we eventually, keep coming back to the fact that we have a common goal. I do want to kind of summarize one other point that my wife made. We each bring different strengths, and that's something that we have to recognize that and respect the other person for that. As she rightly said, I'm a strategist. So I'm the one who kind of looks and lay out the journey. So I'm thinking ahead. I'm thinking about the goal. I'm thinking about down there, down the road. My lovely wife, she lives in the moment, right? She stops, smells the roses, right? So together, we are able to lay out the journey, know where we are going, and yet enjoy the ride. So that's how we look at us together, how we complement each other.
That's beautiful. Before we turn it over to the audience to ask some questions, how about the other two couples? Any disagreements? Do you create safe space? Is it always there?
Well, we actually don't have disagreements. I'm pretty hands-off. It's become kind of a joke. We'll go to a fundraiser, and we'll walk in, and they'll put a pin on me. I turned to Liebe, I said, how much did that cost? So it's like a running joke. I trust, we're very much aligned in our thinking. I trust what she does. And she's also financially conservative, so I know that it's not all going out the door, that it's a good balance. I don't really ask, actually. We go to our annual visit to the accountant's office to go over our tax returns, and she won't let me look at the charity line. So the truth is, I actually don't know I really don't know where we are in that regard, but I trust that it's in balance with what we can do, so that's...
And when the mail arrives and there's a thank you, sometimes he doesn't see those letters. Or when someone thanks me verbally, they're like, can I talk to Seth? No. But generally, he does. I mean, we do each have our pet projects. Like we said, our core values are aligned around this. How many zeros get added is where, it's just a zero. But he has specific things that he likes to give to, anything to do with charities involving golf tournaments, for example, or...
Well, it's not quite like that. No, but I mean, in the business world, I'm sure you all know, there's the Boys and Girls Club or Habitat for Humanity, and you know people, they're the executive directors, they're friends of yours, so you say yes. So we leave a little bit so I could just do whatever I want with that regard. And I get a call, someone's doing a ride in the Leukemia Society, so here's some money. It's just stuff like that, but it's not really a pet project, but leave room to help friends out too that are passionate about their stuff.
Yeah. Libby, you've got a good thing going. So. Keep it up. You've got a good thing going.
I know, I'm happy there.
Sure. Don and Chris?
Well, I think that along with our marriage, we'll hit 20 years in May. I think we've learned that if there's any heat that starts building for whoever has the most passion about a certain issue, we've learned to sort of seed the ground. So I think in a lot of ways, we try to explain where we're coming from things, and he or she who argues passionately the most wins out. So I wouldn't say it's an argument, it's just more of a, which one hits our heart hardest, and I think we enjoy bringing that out in each other, actually. How would you say?
Yeah, well, and I was thinking of an anecdote, because it's often whenever something does happen, it's what we learn from it afterwards that's really helpful. So we have this donor advised fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation, and the main emphasis of that fund is to support different organizations in Pittsburgh, specifically visual or performing arts. And we had an emergency request. The program officer called us and said there's an arts group in Pittsburgh that is having some budget issues. They're not going to necessarily be able to make it till the end of their year end. We're looking to some of the Pittsburgh, the foundation donors to consider helping out. And it was an interesting kind of a discussion between us because on the face of it, the ask coming from the foundation, it all seemed very appropriate, and yet Dawn knew some of the people behind the scenes, and it's like if they're in this financial situation, they may be nice people, but they may not be organized, and maybe they need to actually sort of understand those consequences rather than just get bailed out by somebody. And so we went back and forth, and in the end, we did give them the emergency funding, and like 2 or 3 months later, we got the perfunctory thank you note. We never got follow-up from them. And for us, for me, it was a great lesson that, to trust Don's gut for one thing, but also it's if there are red flags, to really suss them out and to dig deeper and not just take someone's word for it. And it's made us more cautious in how we do some of that, using that fund or just investing in general, because we do understand that they came from a good place, but in the end, I think we felt a little burned by that. And
Yeah, and so it informs the no answer as much as the yes answer. Or the smaller response as opposed to granting what they were asking for.
Sure. Well, thank you. We do want to turn to the audience. We want to make sure that we get you engaged with these three fabulous couples. There were three questions that came up. Let's get to those, and they were very similar. If you have children, can you share how you're engaging them in your work? Do they share the mission, and how are you educating them to give?
So we do have, we have two boys.
And how old are your children?
So our sons are in their 30s.
36 and 32.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, we have three
We
grandchildren.
have 3 grandkids. So both of them are very appreciative. Now, obviously, they have young kids and they are still in, I won't even call it wealth creation mode. They're in, hey, how do we pay the bills mode, right? But they're very engaged in the conversations with us. They do give us ideas in how we scale this forward. And in their own ways, they are engaged. Volunteering is becoming a little part of their lives. And we take their input, but right now, this is Raj and my initiative. We are not looking at it from a familial, multi-generation approach. It's not just our money. It's getting an entire sleeping giant of a community to rise. Right? So it's very actionable. It's not strategic and, okay, after us, what happens? I hope we burn this money before we leave, right? And not burn it, but really employ it in how we want to employ it.
That's a mother's view. Now a father's view. I think the boys can do a lot more.
Oh, definitely.
I think they should do a lot more. She's very caring, very nurturing. She always sees the bright side of the kids can't do anything wrong. And I'm saying, come on, 36, 32, you need to get involved. You need to become my strength. We're trying to raise a whole community to make a difference, and more hands better. But they are busy with their lives, right? Also, father, son, there's always a conflict, right? I mean, if I'm doing something, I find that they're always trying to find issues in it as opposed to support it. That's my viewpoint. That's my viewpoint. I want to clarify that. Right? Because I'm saying, hey, you should be obedient like I was. Just believe in me, put faith in me, and move forward. I don't think my father would say that I was obedient.
That's what your father said too.
Yeah. Hey, if that works, tell me how you did it, okay?
You were the perfect child.
That's right.
Anybody
That's
else?
right. But the point here is this, that we both decided that we're not going to force our children into something that we believe in. It has, just like I mentioned earlier, partners also. You cannot force them, or else you're not partners. That applies to children. Because they have to, we are creating an environment. They are seeing what mom and dad are involved in, where they spend majority of their waking hours and time in, where they are putting money where their mouth is, right? If that interests them, if they want to join in, there is no what's called a right that they have to come and accept a leadership role because they are born to us, no royalty here. But our goal is to let them get ready for it and join when they are mentally ready, whenever they want to start contributing.
And they may choose a different cause.
They may choose different
And that's
cause.
totally okay.
That's right. Anybody else?
Do you want to go ahead?
so I think that we do a couple different things. One is my parents have sat down with their grandchildren and done sort of like the Pittsburgh Foundation does a wish book, where a number of groups have put in requests for different, $700 for tools or $500 for a projector or whatever it might be. And so my parents have sat down with their grandkids about, how do they get, what sort of things would they want to support? And we've had lots of talks with our kids about values and asking my parents to talk about their values to the grandkids so that they can see how that passes along.
How old are the kids?
Oh,
Dorothy
sorry,
wants to know.
sorry, thank you. 17 and 14. So they're still they're high school age. But the story I was going to share that I just thought of, when our son, gosh, he was only maybe 8 or 9.
Oh.
He used to wake up to the radio every morning, listen to the classical music station, and they were doing Pledge Week. And they're asking people to give, and he's only 8 or so. So he decides, he comes downstairs and tells Dawn, his mom, that he wants to make a donation. So Dawn asks him how much, or do you want to tell the story?
No, go ahead.
How much do you want to give? And he goes up and he counts his allowance, and he has $22. So they call the local public radio station, the classical music, and get on the phone. And the announcer, is glad to hear that somebody wants to give. And how much do you want to give? $22. $20? No, $22. And there's this conversation going on between an 8-year-old and a radio host. And it was really cute. He did the $22, and we actually matched that. We had said whatever he wanted to give, we would match, so it ended up being $44. But then throughout the rest of the hour, the radio host was saying that young Andrew had given money, and it sort of led to others giving, which was really neat. And actually, my father happened to be in the car at one point going to a physical therapy appointment and got to hear his grandson, doing that donation that he didn't know was coming. So it's just, I don't know, moments like that, I think, can be very formative. And
That's great. That's wonderful. Any stories?
So we have 2 daughters, ages 31 and 28. I would say we're running 50% on this. Okay, so one of them is
That's true.
no, not there yet. It's just not. It's not in her. It's not what she thinks about. The other one, Seth would say, has gone into the family business. She was a really good fundraiser actually in high school for NCJW for young women in Israel, and then in whatever she gives at a small membership level even now to an organization and several other organizations, and her college application said, I went to the daycare of Save Dade, which was the organization that we were so involved with in Miami for LGBTQ rights. And that was the basis for her entire college application essay. Very much informs who she is. She's, both of our kids, by the way, are straight cisgender allies. And even ultimately on her doctoral degree right now, her dissertation was on some mental health and behavioral aspects within the trans population. So I would say that her philanthropy in dollars isn't there yet because she has no money. She's like a starving student, but she's clearly getting there. But her actions very much are, I would say, philanthropic around specific causes. And again, with our giving to the Miami Foundation, to our fund, I'm hoping that they will take that on and advise some of those funds even beyond our lives.
We are their models.
Yeah, just that we brought them everywhere. Like we didn't have childcare, so they came everywhere. So they were in the room, and they take from that what they want. Yeah. I will say when our younger daughter, the one we're talking about, went in the family, her business, not mine. She was giving, she gave a TEDx talk, and the morning of the TEDx talk, she comes in, she says, Dad, would you consider yourself a feminist? I'm like, yeah. I don't know why she asked that. Then she's up on stage, and she goes, and my dad, who says he's a feminist. She set me up, but I hadn't really thought about it, but I had no choice. If you knew my mom and you've met my wife, you would know that there really wasn't much choice there.
That's great. Great role models right here. We are almost at a break here, and I'm going to ask the couples to make a last comment about any advice you want to give to this illustrious audience in terms of their joy in this journey. And I'm going to give you 1 minute per couple, okay? Yes. Raj?
I guess I'll be talking.
1 minute per couple?
Yes, 1 minute.
I mean, 30 seconds each?
You can do it.
If you want to share.
Or 60
seconds.
So, shall I?
Please.
Okay. So an approach that we took that really helped us was, we kind of went through an exercise of how much do we need to live out our life. Because we felt like, if you didn't know that number, you could be working. It's like and you'd be in hoarding mode your entire life because you didn't know you had enough. So we figured that out. We figured out how much we wanted to give our kids. We've been very influenced by the Gates, all of these other families who've got tremendous amounts, but not everything goes to the kids. So we decided there was a lot that we learned through the struggles that we went through, and we shouldn't deprive our kids of that. So, we decided what they should get, and we actually gave it to them, because we thought this was the time they would most appreciate those resources. Later in life, they'll have their own, so it doesn't matter. So once we got all of that set up, then we are now looking at, okay, we know exactly the cause we are working towards, and now, interestingly, we find ourselves chipping away at other budgets that we had and say, oh, this would work so much better in this cause that we are working for. Do I really need another handbag? No, I don't. Here, let me make a donation. So I think it's really important to know how much you need. And I would encourage everybody that, and most of you are consultants in philanthropy, advising and stuff. I think once your clients, the people you're speaking with understand how much they need, they can more identify easily how much they can give.
This is called the Indian 1 minute. It stretches out.
Stretch.
Last couple.
Okay, you actually brought a thought to my mind. I wasn't sure if it would come out today. October 27th this year, we were sitting in a ballet theater on the day of the shooting in our city. And we were premiering our ballet, opening our season. And there was a moment of silence. There was a beautiful live performance of Requiem to soothe everyone. And it felt so good. It felt so good to be together, to be in the arts, to see the ballet, to hear the music, to be around the people who appreciated it. And it renewed my passion and why I really feel like the arts can unite us in a way that we haven't found yet in our country. And I care deeply about supporting other people's issues too, because I really appreciate that everybody finds their own paths, and that's my suggestion. Find your path, innovate, and just thank you, I need multiple. And just try to innovate, because I think that I'm really interested in innovating. I'm treating it like a business. I have spreadsheets. I put themes down, and we talk with the computer open with the spreadsheets. But find your path, find your passion, and just go for it. Find something you're very passionate about and go for it. That's what Julia Child said.
Thank you. Couples, thank you for your passion, your compassion, your philanthropic generosity, and for being here with us today. We really appreciate your stories. Keep up the great work you're doing. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you all.